Hi, Ramesh.
Hi, Matt.
How's it going?
Fine, how are you?
I'm good. My earpiece is a little bit broken, so I'm holding the cell phone, sort of breaking the illusion. But other than that, things are excellent. I guess Bob, the almighty Lord of Blogging Heads, thought you should be introduced to the audience. So you are I actually guess I don't know your title, but it's some title at National Review.
Yes, that's right. Senior editor at National Review.
Senior editor at National Review. You're also, frequently cited by liberals when we're forced to name some conservative writer, pundit out there, to prove that we're not just saying that no conservative should be allowed. Ramesh Ponnuru. This is what we've got.
And that's why so many conservatives despise me, I guess.
Or what? Right. And then, so I guess the other mandate that we had coming on from down high was that Bob wanted to get your take on the Democrats running for office, and I guess I don't have a great segue for this, but I don't know. Anything you want to say about that?
Well, I mean, the thing that strikes, I think, anybody looking at both fields is just the marked increase in enthusiasm for the Democrats over, say, 2004, and certainly over what the Republicans have right now. I mean, there's certainly some Democrats who want Gore to jump in, and I think probably Gore would be the strongest Democratic general election candidate, but it's nothing like the near hysteria on the Republican side, the sort of panicky urge to call Fred Thompson in to save the party.
Right. I mean, I guess, one thing that I hear a lot in sort of my circles and in more progressive circles is that, John Edwards, in virtue of his sort of, white male southernness, may just be much more electorally formidable than Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And I don't know. I mean, I wonder if you as a conservative put any credence into that.
Well, I think there may be something to that. I suspect that by the end of the election campaign in 2008, Hillary Clinton will have been able to neutralize whatever possible liability her being a woman is in the race, partly because she'll have been out there for so long campaigning that it will seem, it'll be sort of old news. I mean, if you remember when she ran for the Senate in New York in 2000, there was a lot, in 1999 in particular, there was a lot of talk about how she was sort of a carpetbagger and people wouldn't accept her. But the media saturation was such that by the end it seemed as though she'd been living there forever, because you could hardly remember when she wasn't on TV all the time talking about the Yankees or whatever. And I think in a way she'll have already overcome the hurdle before Election Day. And, one of the interesting things about this is there's constantly going to be this tug of war between the Republicans and the Democrats, with everything that the Republicans want to use to portray her as a bitch. She is going to try to flip around and turn it into, well, this shows how tough I am, and then vice versa, So it'll be sort of the exact same traits that are getting sort of positive and negative exposures.
Well, I mean, especially because, in the primaries, it seems that, probably one of the biggest assets she has running in the Democratic primary is the volume of attacks that she's been subjected to by conservatives. I mean, it sort of let her get away with, I think, much more, substantive deviation from what the Democratic base wants people to say than ordinarily could have been. That, liberals have gotten so used to defending Clinton against, what seemed to us to be unfair, over-the-top attacks, that it's, for one thing, I mean, it feels almost, sacrilegious to sort of further pile on and, be on the side of, National Review writers on something like this. And also, she can just use it sort of as, wave the bloody shirt kind of way.
Well, I think a spokesman for the Clinton campaign a few weeks ago actually said that Clinton was the candidate that the Republicans feared the most, that the Clintons have a track record of defeating Republicans, and this is why the Republicans are constantly attacking her. And I actually don't think it's true. I mean, I don't think that she's the candidate that Republicans fear the most. I think actually that most Republicans are more worried about Obama still. Although I think myself that Clinton would be the more formidable candidate. But you raised the question of sort of race and gender on this ticket. Do you think that let's say Clinton gets the nomination, does it make sense to make Obama the vice presidential nominee, sort of in a way kind of hang a lantern on your problem and just sort of try to emphasize the history-making nature of the ticket and sort of ride it for all it's worth, or go with an Edwards?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think in particular, Obama and Clinton have started to get into it, mix it up in each other in a way that might preclude that anyway. But, I mean, I guess I do sort of adhere to the cautious conventional wisdom in the sense that, it would be better to balance with someone more kind of normal. Not normal. I don't want to say that women are abnormal.
That was your Trent Lott moment there.
Right, yes.
That's going into permanent record.
A more traditional, in the sense of white and male candidate. Because, I mean, the first woman president would be, I think, an enormously historic, event, all on its own terms, as would certainly the first black president. I don't know that there's any need to get, extra super duper historic over something like that.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Okay, well, so, all right, there's an unfortunate lack of disagreement on this. Maybe we could move on to immigration, where there's, obviously last week, the bill failed, and I guess the president went to the Senate Republican caucus lunch today or something to try and see if he can revive this compromise.
Although it's entirely possible that he left the lunch with fewer votes than he went into it with.
Really?
This is, just given his recent track record
Sure.
and his ability to win friends and influence people right now. But really, this is really something. I mean, he didn't go to the Hill and have lunch with senators during the Harry and Meyerson. He hasn't done it on Iraq for several years, but he's willing to really double down on this immigration bill. And, we have to say that there is a chance that this can be pulled out. I mean, the bill only got 45 votes for cloture last week, but that I don't think is a true reflection of its actual strength in the Senate. And although I think the odds have fallen for it substantially, it's not yet dead.
I mean, this strikes me as the kind of thing where once it began to lose its sort of sheen of inevitability, that the prospects for the bill get worse and worse.
Well, right. I mean, there were people who supported this bill entirely on the basis of its alleged inevitability. I mean, the original argument that conservatives on the Hill were making for the sort of John Kyle position was, look, this thing is going to steamroll over us, and the choice is make it as conservative as possible, or just allow it to pass in a more liberal version over your opposition, but you're not going to stop it. And
sure.
Kyle himself has gotten dug in to the point where it doesn't look like he's going to leave it, but I think some of the other people will.
Right. Well, and from my perspective, I mean, when this bill came out, I found, the idea of a giant, 400,000 person a year guest worker program highly objectionable, and sort of, got the same thing that, like, well, if this bill doesn't pass, something you like even less is going to come forward. But then, it was amended down to 200,000 people, which, I felt a little bit better about. And then, Dorgan's amendment came up, which I guess from my point of view, I didn't really care whether or not it was intended as a poison pill. I mean, I thought that the bill as amended is something, I could have supported. And if amending it that way caused the bill to die, that's also, I guess, an okay outcome. I mean, I don't think anyone's thrilled with the immigration status quo, but I mean, there's been this real effort to convince people that the status quo is so intolerable that we should all support literally any alternative to it.
Yeah, the thing that I find really odd in this debate is that certainly sort of in the intra-Republican debate, the people who are actually happiest with the status quo, really, despite what they say, are big business, the Bush administration, and sort of the open borders wing of the Republican Party. And so they're trying to make this argument that, we really have to pass this reform. But they're perfectly happy with what we have now, with a basically open border, with as much cheap labor as business groups want, and there is something sort of peculiar in the way that they're making these arguments. Or not so much peculiar as jarring, I guess.
Jarring, right? Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true, and certainly, it inspires a certain amount of disingenuous, this issue, it seems to me, on some people's parts.
Well, yeah, I mean, like today, my own website has this thing by Linda Chavez where she reiterates this point, which a bunch of the pro-bill conservatives have made, that, gosh, all of a sudden people are all whipped up about illegal immigration, and yet they're not willing to do anything about it. And it's just completely blind to the fact that the reason this issue became such a big issue over the last 3 years is because her side of the argument insisted on pushing this bill, which was entirely gratuitous. They're the ones who put it on the national agenda.
No, right. I agree with that. And I think to transition a little, I mean, one place you've definitely seen that kind of style of argument is in the Republican primary, right, where John McCain has, over the past year, maybe done a lot of things to try and sort of re-ingratiate himself with conservatives after having, mostly alienated them all. But the immigration bill, remains, I think, the one still glaring example of his maverick-y qualities. And, I mean, I guess my conjecture was that if the bill would just die, that would sort of help his campaign.
Well, it seems to me that that is the best outcome for him if the bill dies. The second best outcome is if it's sort of inconclusive the way it is right now, and the worst outcome is if it actually passes. And in fact, I think in general, if you're Harry Reid and you're looking for a sort of partisan advantage here, the ideal thing is to keep this issue alive and just force it to be debated inconclusively from now through 2008, because it really does tear the Republicans apart.
I mean, from, I guess, like, narrowly, from McCain's perspective, it seems to me that having the issue be open is very bad for him. That, he would, insofar as, say, the Republicans, disagree with themselves about abortion, say, I mean, I think that clearly, plays into McCain's hands vis-a-vis his rivals, but that, if immigration continues to be this active subject of discussion, then, his efforts to sort of, reposition himself as the real conservative in the race take a real blow, whereas, we went for years in this country without immigration being a sort of, top-tier topic of controversy, and in principle it could go back that way.
Well, and I think what's particularly deadly for McCain with conservatives on this issue, it's not just, although it's obviously a big factor, that most conservatives are so sort of dead set against the bill that McCain supports. It's also that, apart from the individual issues that have alienated conservatives from McCain, there's a suspicion that he just doesn't like us, and that he actually sort of enjoys it more when he is on the other side from us than when he's with us. And this legislation is an occasion for seeing that in action, when he, attacks the more conservative, anti-immigrant, anti-legislation wing of the party, for example. I mean, there just seems to be more of a zest, more of a spring in his step when he makes that kind of argument. So it sort of comes more naturally to him, at least more naturally to the McCain of 2007, and conservatives pick up on that. They made, very early on in this, what now is already sort of an old presidential primary cycle, a Giuliani supporter said to me, look, McCain may agree with us on 80% of the issues, and Giuliani on 60% of the issues. But when Giuliani agrees with us, he's in the foxhole with us, fighting for us. And when McCain does, he didn't last year, and he won't next year, and he actually hates our guts.
But that's not your view of McCain, right?
It's a view that I go back and forth on. I think that there is something to it. I think, for example, if you look at the way McCain's conducting his campaign, I think that there are sharper digs by McCain at Romney than at Giuliani, and I don't think that is dictated by any deep structural factor in the primaries. It's that McCain is more annoyed with Romney personally than he is with Giuliani. And one of the reasons he's more annoyed with Romney is that Romney's a threat from the right, and Romney's sort of pulling him to a place he doesn't want to be, and that's not the case with Rudy. So I do think that there is something to this.
Okay. Well, I guess, speaking of Giuliani and immigration, as I grew up in New York in the 90s when Giuliani was mayor. And in a liberal family that, was against Giuliani, when he first won election and, warmed to him a little bit and they got alienated by him. But, one thing I definitely remember from that time was that he had a really, really, really vehemently pro-immigration sort of line as mayor, a fact which seems to me to have, dropped out of the Republican debate at this point.
Well, Giuliani doesn't want to be as big a flip-flopper as Mitt Romney, which I guess is sort of hard for anyone to be. But what he's done is he hasn't actually changed his view on any of this. He's come up with this sort of BS excuse for being against the immigration bill.
Right.
It's the federal database in the bill isn't
right.
data
But how is it that he's not getting called on this BS?
Well, I think he's actually hit the sweet spot on this issue because, the base really hates McCain over this issue, and he couldn't be in the same spot, but as long as he was against the bill, I don't think anybody's at the grassroots level is really looking into the details of his position, and he's certainly leaving open the option of amnesty. Right.
Well, I recall that when he was mayor, he, had a rule in place that made it, ordered city officials not to cooperate with federal immigration authorities, and that he, a federal law was passed to try and prevent cities from doing this. He sued for his right to not enforce immigration laws in New York. And these were things I think the voters in New York City were generally sympathetic to, like a lot of his more sort of left stances. But it seems to me, would be anathema to conservatives in particular. He was... It seems to me that if, as mayor, he could have implemented an amnesty, he would have.
He said around that time that, if you want to work, even if you don't have documents, we want you here. Those are the kinds of people we want in New York City. So not even really a gesture toward the rule of law.
Giuliani, that's the tradition of New York City.
Yeah.
As most people understand it. But it's very much not. It seems to me where conservatives are.
No, it has always seemed to me that being an ad consultant during these primaries for one of the non-Giuliani campaigns would be the easiest job in the world because the negative ad against Rudy just writes itself. You can go through Cuomo and NAFTA and welfare reform and immigration. You don't even have to hit partial birth abortion or any of these other any of those the issues that have attracted the most attention, which is one of the reasons I'm skeptical he'll ever be the nominee.
Sure. But I guess here's the thing. I think among Democrats that the feeling is almost universal that Giuliani is the candidate that the Democrats most fear facing. But the reason people aren't all that afraid of it is that there keeps being this assumption that he will lose, that, conservatives will wake up to the wide array of hot-button issues on which, he has a liberal record and decide, they don't care that much about his health care proposal. But it seems to me, it keeps not happening. He keeps leading in the polls. What's the deal? How come the conservative journalists of the world can't, inform and persuade your audience more effectively?
Well, I've got a lot of conservative journalist friends who are pro-Giuliani on various bases. Actually, no, I do know of one high-profile Democratic strategist who thinks Giuliani is the easiest candidate to beat, but unfortunately I can't name that strategist right here, and I'll take your word. You probably know more folks in those circles than I do. I think that part of what's going on is it's just you have this, it's sort of an illusion created by a multi-candidate field. And that he has sunk. He's come back a little bit, but he's still, I think the long-term trend has been towards sinking, but if you've got a big enough field, you can still be leading. it may be that 70% of the Republican primary electorate has decided, that they're going to take a pass on you, but that won't become clear until the field winnows a little bit. And of course, the Thompson thing is sort of, I think, in a way, kind of freezing the other folks in place a little bit.
Right. There's this sort of hope of a mystery candidate. Although, I mean, he also just seems to me to be, obviously benefiting from the fact that, I guess this is what you were saying about Thompson, but that, neither of his opponents, his major opponents, is quite an orthodox, a standard issue conservative either.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right,
the bottom of I think conservatives, though, in a way, spend too much time obsessing about the particulars of these candidates. The fundamental problem, I think, which is deeper than anything going on in the primaries on either side, is the conservative base. The conservative base is just out of step with the public right now. And given that circumstance and that its likely persistence into 2008, it would take an extraordinarily gifted politician to bridge the gap. And I think conservatives need to be giving more thought to that than to, what's going on in Iowa right at the moment.
Right. But there's this paradoxical quality, it seems to me, to the conservatives' out-of-stepness, as you put it, which is that, I mean, conservatives, the conservative base seems to me to be most out of step with the public on Iraq, whereas the sort of cultural conservatism, which is where the candidates are having the most trouble with the base. I don't know. I mean, there's perennial disputes as to what the public opinion about abortion really is, about immigration, so on and so forth. But, nothing has changed since 2004 or 2002 to make sort of pro-life orthodoxy less popular.
Yeah, no, I think the serious case for Giuliani and Giulianism, the serious case is for Giuliani, not Giulianism. The case is that he's got such strengths as a candidate that they overcome the fact that you're throwing away what's been an electoral asset to the Republican Party over the years.
Sure. But I mean, beyond Giuliani, right? I mean, that's the general... I mean, I posted this morning, I guess, this YouTube video of Fred Thompson when he was pro-choice in the early 90s. Mitt Romney, I was living in Massachusetts, and I voted for Mitt Romney back when he was a moderate Republican, who, at the time was running to the left of his opponent on abortion issues and related sorts of topics. When this would seem to be, I think for years now, sort of conservative economic policy thought has been dropping a bit in public esteem, and national security thinking has gotten unpopular because of the war. But that the sort of bread and butter cultural conservatism seems to me like what the right really has going for it, and yet none of the candidates really embody that.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I suppose you could look at somebody like Mike Huckabee, but none of the top tier candidates. The historical... look, the fact that somebody used to be pro-choice or used to be social liberal in some respects, I don't think is quite as significant. The history of the Republican Party, includes a lot of people who have switched on those issues.
Right. Well, in Romney's case, right, since it was Massachusetts and now he switches, I think there's... Some people are convinced that, he was lying back then, and, whatever.
Yeah. Let's not overemphasize the regional basis of this, because then you have this sort of realignment of voter groups in a lot of places. In large parts of the South during the 80s, the Democratic Party, particularly in state legislatures, was more pro-life than the Republican Party was.
Right.
You mentioned Fred Thompson. That Tennessee Republican Party was pretty pro-choice for a long time. Lamar Alexander...
Right, I guess that's what I was wondering, was about the Fred Thompson example.
Yeah.
Because Tennessee, it doesn't seem like a place where, Fred Thompson had to, go pro-life in order to stay viable there.
Well, the Republican Party there was a country clubbish party for a long time, and then it sort of grew and expanded, included some sort of social populists, more downscale voters, and its character changed. And, if you may recall, Lamar Alexander in 96 was running with a sort of demi pro-choice position, and now he's sort of faded into the background, and he has the same voting record anybody else does in the Republican Party on that issue.
All right. Well, I didn't know that. I guess it explains a thing or two. Right.
See, that's the benefit of the historical perspective that we old-timers can give.
Sure, I know. All the way back to
all the way back to 96.
It's sort of tragic. But still, I don't know. Did you write the article about pork barrel spending?
I wrote an article for National Review a couple of weeks ago on earmarks and pork barrel spending.
Right. About earmarks, which that struck me as a really brilliant piece and perfectly exemplifying some of this conservative being out of step thing. That not only you were focusing mostly on the policy merits here, but just the idea that excessive earmarking sort of did in the Republican congressional majority. It seems to me just obviously preposterous, and yet to have taken a surprisingly wide, swath of conservative opinion seems to believe this.
Well, yeah, in the presidential debate last week, the one in New Hampshire, most of the Republican presidential candidates were saying, "Oh, the spending killed us in 2006. That's how we lost our way." And that's insane. The data don't support that at all. The best you can say for that argument is that a sort of limited government reformist conservatism probably would have looked a little bit better than a Republican Party that was mainly concerned with keeping its members out of jail and hitting on the interns and losing a war in Iraq. But
sure.
But even, actually, I'm not even sure that's true. One of the things that I keep hearing from conservatives is complaints about this prescription drug bill in 2003, and we should never have allowed this. Those of us who opposed it should have opposed it more, and so on and so forth. And it seems to me that if Bush had not promised a prescription drug benefit, he would not have won in 2000. If he had not delivered on that promise with an all-Republican government, he would have lost in 2004. And the idea, this was something that the prescription drug benefit was wildly popular, including with self-described conservative voters, as soon as it became a national issue back in '99, which is why everybody in the party immediately capitulated on the issue. And the idea that the public is just sick to death of all of these government benefits and is just waiting for some candidate who will slash them all. I wish that were the case, but unfortunately, there's just no evidence at all that it is the case.
I think the prescription drug bill, though, and the discourse around that is a great example. That to me, where Bush went wrong is not that he embraced a prescription drug bill, because obviously the public was demanding that. It was a very popular idea. It's basic to the logic of Medicare that it ought to have a prescription drug component.
Yeah, if you were designing this now from scratch, you would have a prescription drug component.
Right. But that, what Bush did, and obviously Bush's tactic on this was to say, okay, there needs to be a prescription drug bill. If I oppose it, I'll just lose, and we'll get a Democratic bill. What I need to do is say I'm for it, win the election, and then pass, a Republicanized version of a prescription drug bill. But to him, what that meant was not a prescription drug bill that was going to be cheaper than the Democratic bill, but actually a prescription drug bill that was even more expensive, because it was made, not more favorable to low-tax conservatives, but more favorable to the executives at health care businesses. It was friendlier to the pharmaceutical companies, friendlier to the insurance companies, rather than reflecting a sort of principled conservative take on the idea of providing this benefit in some kind of more streamlined way. And that that kind of thing is where the critique of big government conservatism could get its purchase. That for Bush, a lot of the times, it's meant a sort of mix between capitulating to liberals and being corrupt, rather than, doing the minimum necessary to keep the public.
Yeah, the conservative sort of think tank types in 2002 and 2003 were saying, well, why not have some sort of means-tested program for seniors who actually can't afford prescription drugs? And the basic reason that they lost the intra-Republican fight was that the corporate folks wanted a broader benefit, which would, in some cases offload some of their costs, and in other cases provide some direct subsidies to them. And unfortunately, that wasn't just the president; that was congressional Republicans as well.
Well, no, sure. Obviously these kind of interests are, influential over a range of things. But I guess conservative, especially sort of conservative intellectual types would do themselves well, I think, to be like a little bit more precise as to where it is they think that went awry, rather than at least what you hear the candidates saying is just the spending.
Right, we just shouldn't have done it at all.
Right. But, obviously, the reason even conservative politicians vote for more spending on programs is that their constituents, want the programs.
Right, of course. The same thing with pork. This idea that, we need more transparency in the process, as though most congressmen are trying to hide the local projects that they win through the appropriations process. In fact, one of the things I point out in that article is if you really want less pork, you shouldn't mandate disclosure. You should ban it. If none of these guys was allowed to issue a press release saying, this highway connector brought to you courtesy of Congressman so-and-so, you'd see a lot less of it. A lot more, I'll just give this to the highway administration. They can figure out how they want to spend it.
Right. Well, I think that's right. And probably something we should actually consider doing. Not just sort of ironically. I guess we should move on to Iraq, maybe. There was this Thomas Ricks article in yesterday's Post, which sort of spelled out in more detail something that had been hinted at a lot, but which was that the military's sort of working plan for, quote-unquote, post-occupation Iraq still involves a giant American military presence there. 50,000 troops or so was what he was talking about, including, a whole mechanized division, as well as trainers and so on and so forth. I feel like on some level, this is the kind of thing which, if liberals had said, before the Iraq War, well, look, not only are we going to be fighting this for years, but, the point of this venture is to establish, an enormous permanent American military presence in Iraq to, project power throughout the region. People say, oh, you're crazy, blah, 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 freedom, blah, blah, blah. But, this is where we're at now, and with surprisingly little comment on it, I think.
Well, I don't know if I got from that article, although maybe I just didn't read it as carefully as you did, I don't know if I got from it the idea that our forces would be there for an extended period of time in order to serve as a way of projecting force in the region, so much as that there'll still be necessary sort of backup forces in Iraq. I guess one reason why there hasn't been so much debate about this, and I agree, let me just back up a second. We've heard some discussion from the administration about there being some sort of Korean model in Iraq where you stick around, for 50 years. And it seems to be really foolish for two reasons. First, I think your sort of average sort of jokey public hears that and thinks, oh my God, we're going to be here for 50 more years. And then sort of anybody who's actually sort of studied these things and given it some thought will say, wait a second, this parallel makes no sense whatsoever, since there's no demilitarized zone for us to be guarding. But I guess the reason you're not hearing so much debate about this is it's such an optimistic scenario that forms the premise of this. The precondition for this sort of long-term presence, where you withdraw 2/3 of the forces but leave about a third for a long period of time, is that you've actually brought the violence down to a level where those remaining troops are not going to be regularly involved in combat. And if we ever got to that point, I think 2/3 of the country would be leaping up and down with joy. But we're obviously not there. It's such a hypothetical and sort of rosy scenario policy.
Right, but see, to me, it's not purely hypothetical, because part of the reason why it's not safe for our troops there, right, is that there are all kinds of groups, Sunni Arab nationalists, and then again, Shiite nationalists around Muqtada al-Sadr's circle, who believe that they need to deploy violence against American forces, otherwise the American military won't leave their country. right? There's always been this paradoxical attitude, question around the debate, right, where hawks have said, okay, no, we can't leave Iraq because, we need to win, we need to stabilize the country. But then at the same time, the objective of the insurgents has been to get our troops to leave, right? So it's always seemed like there could be a win-win here, right? I mean, we want the insurgents to stop fighting us, and the insurgents want us to leave. So in principle, if the insurgents would just agree to not have any attacks for a month, then we'd say, oh, victory, and pack up and go, and everyone's happy. Except it turns out that the insurgents are right? That the Bush administration's plan is for the United States military to perpetually stay there in force, to presumably, to influence the shape of the government there and the policies there and throughout the region. And, I mean, this is, in fact, obviously not the only cause of violence in Iraq because it's become incredibly multifaceted. But, one of the very issues here is that, lots and lots and lots of Iraqis, the overwhelming majority by most polls, do not want American troops in their country, and some of them are willing to take up arms to get rid of us. And, so we may never be able to draw down to 50,000, but it's the aspiration to keep the 50,000 there that's requiring this large-scale combat.
So you're saying that sort of stories like the Rick story, or sort of the underlying reality that he's reporting on, that the administration is thinking about staying on for such a long period of time, actually increases the violence against us, whereas the hawkish counter-argument is going to be, well, if we announce that we're staying there forever, then there's less incentive to step up the attacks in order to push us out. And I suppose that's one of those sort of endless hawk-dove debates that the answer to which is incredibly important, but I can't figure out what that answer is.
Right, but I mean, I guess it depends to some extent on what. I mean, it depends on that question, but also what is why is it so important to maintain that kind of presence like that there, right? I mean, what is it supposed to accomplish? I mean, you said your reading of the Rick story, didn't necessarily say anything about projecting power throughout the region. And I mean, I agree that those words weren't in the article. It says something vague about, deterring the Iranians from meddling. But I mean, I guess to me, it's that I don't see quite what the rationale is supposed to be. I mean, why, honestly...
well, I'm sure the Iranians read it the same way that you did.
What?
I'm sure the Iranians read it the same way that you did.
Right. I mean, exactly. But I mean, then again, this is the thing that, so it seems to me that, on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, right, the Bush administration sort of whines that the Iranians are interfering with what we're doing in Iraq. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, they say that part of what we're doing in Iraq is working for the overthrow of the Iranian government. But so, I mean, how... what kind of strategy is that exactly? I mean, of course the Iranians are going to try to destabilize Iraq if part of what we want to do with a stable Iraq is provide a platform for activities against the Iranian government.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Which, and it's not the only place where we sort of seem to be following contradictory strategies at the same time. Every once in a while, that sort of thing can work out. I mean, if there's a happy scenario in Iraq, it would be something like the Democrats' constant threats that we're going to pull out sort of forces the government in Iraq to get serious. And meanwhile, the Bush administration is offering some sort of security at the same time. But of course, the more likely scenario is if you follow a contradictory strategy, you don't achieve any of your aims.
Right. Well, you know what I mean? I was going to say, my sort of later insight about the Rick's piece was that, I've been reading my hostile reaction to what was in there as, criticism of the president and of the administration. But actually what was outlined there is very consistent, it seems to me, with what the leading Democrats have said their policies are. Nobody who's trying... bases and... Well, nobody who's trying to win the Democratic nomination is going to explicitly say, I want to keep 50,000 troops in Iraq. But, they'll say, well, we need, I'm going to withdraw combat forces. This is Edwards and Clinton and Obama, I think have all said this. But we're going to maintain the training of Iraqis and some units to do counterterrorism and forces for force protection. And I think, most Democrats have sort of been hearing that and saying, well, okay, withdraw combat troops, training sounds good. But part of what Ricks was spelling out was that to, actually accomplish those missions requires a pretty giant force. Force protection and logistics in modern warfare just turn out to be, really difficult and personnel intensive. And, you can't do a substantial training mission with just a handful of people.
So basically you think that the Democrats, for political reasons, are not going, sort of, so to speak, as left as they need to on this issue, or as they ought to in policy terms.
Right. Well, I'm not sure. Obviously, this is, to some extent, a fluid situation. But, yeah, it's the Democrats, except for, I guess, Bill Richardson, aren't quite as left as I'd like to see them be, or as left as they're sort of implying that they are. I imagine the upshot is that if any of these people were president, you would have people in the administration sort of arguing both sides of the question because, Democrats' views on this differ a lot, and, new administrations usually that's when they're maximally open to sort of different points of view. And I guess it would be good to, have a wide range of opinion and a debate on this, but yeah, I do think that, both Republicans and the Democratic candidates at this point sort of have an interest in portraying the Democrats as having really sharply differentiated themselves from Bush, but it's not clear to me that they really have.
Well, this is Matt Yglesias and Bob Kagan together, right? This is his whole argument that the Democrats, he in particular singles out Obama as somebody who's essentially maintaining the sort of global democratic mission and being willing to use military force to achieve it. I guess this raises the question, if you're more on the dovish end of the spectrum, which of these Democratic candidates do you trust more to be naming foreign policy personnel?
Right. Although, I should say specifically on Kagan's argument, I'm not particularly looking for a candidate who would, radically revise America's approach to the world, from what it was, whenever. But, on the specific issue of Iraq, I've become, very, very dovish, which all of the Democrats are sort of saying they are. But, Hillary Clinton said, right, the differences between us are small, the differences between all of us and Bush are enormous. But, I don't know.
You're saying sort of the first half of that is more correct than the second?
Right. At least possibly. Part of what happens...
What about Iran? Iran, in a way, is sort of a bigger question.
Right.
And I take it from having seen various things of yours that you're dovish on Iran as well. But I can certainly think of some Democratic possible secretaries of state and national security advisors and so forth who would probably be quite a bit more hawkish. And my guess would be that the folks in an Obama administration would probably be more dovish than in either Clinton or Edwards administration.
Yeah, that's my working hypothesis too. Although it's not entirely clear cut. Certainly it's not clear cut from their statements. One thing I've definitely found writing is that while I agree with you in that assessment, that I'm having a hard time persuading other people that I'm right because there's something of a paucity of hard proof to go by there. But certainly, if the Obama campaign were to want to take my advice, I would have him stop sort of bragging about having been against the Iraq War from the beginning and start trying to say more specifically that he was against the Iraq War from the beginning because he has some kind of different approach to the world and to foreign policy, which is reflected in X, Y, and Z, and because I don't think people care all that much about what happened years and years ago. Whereas, I think people do care about whether or not the next president is going to start a war with Iran.
Yeah, well, let's say the Democratic candidates were given this question: will you two take tactical nukes off the table? Do you think that their answers would have been all that different from the Republicans? And more to the point, do you think their answers could be all that different politically?
Yeah, look, I certainly think the tactical nuclear weapon should be taken off the table with Iran, and I think most of the Democrats would have said that. They've gotten these questions, Iran-related questions. It's just that, the answers that people give to those questions says more about political positioning than it does about how they would actually conduct Iran policy. Right? I mean, because there's a very wide range of views that still encompasses the idea.
You probably wouldn't want Iran policy to be set on the stage in
No, right, exactly. But, I mean, to rule out using military force against Iran under any hypothetical scenario imaginable, is an extremely strong claim and, really underdetermines the actual question of, how are you going to approach Iran? And there's, a million ins and outs of this, right? There's sorts of things that don't get asked in a debate, but, would you, as president, quietly signal to the government of Israel that, while we can't say so publicly, we would approve in a wink-wink, nudge-nudge way if you launched airstrikes at Iranian nuclear facilities? And there's 1,000 permutations of that kind of scenario. That
it is sort of a ridiculous
you would need to go through to really
to
pin people down. What?
It is sort of a ridiculous question to ask, since, in fact, I don't think any of these guys would, February 2009 start launching, nuclear strikes. But at the same time, very few of them are going to, as you say, make the very strong claim that under no circumstances would they ever do it.
Right. And that despite those similarities doesn't mean that there aren't differences between them in how they would approach the issue. It's just a little, these kind of questions and debates are very crude and don't quite get at the real issue. And in some ways they're misleading, because with rhetoric, politicians can do a lot to try and position themselves left or right, depending on what they're trying to do, in a way that's, literally consistent with all kinds of different things.
Right, yeah, no, they're maintaining their flexibility. I mean, that's something politicians sort of need to be able to do, and, it's not entirely
right, no, I mean, it's smart politically, but annoying journalistically.
Yeah, true.
Right. They need to, make things more convenient for us to write about it. Especially because campaigns are so long these days.
This is a very long campaign. That's why, we're all grateful that new candidates might jump in and out. What do you think? Do you think Gore might actually do it?
I guess not. No one seems to think he will. So I'm going to just
that's
agree with the herd-like conventional wisdom. No, I know, but I have no particular insight into the situation. So I mean, I'm saying no. I guess I take Gore at his word when he says things about how he didn't really feel like he was good at politics and didn't enjoy it. It seems totally plausible to me that someone with his particular family background could have gotten, weirdly deep in the waters of being a professional politician without ever having, and then
right.
late in life forced to be like, well, wait, do I actually want to do this? No. What I want to do is talk about global warming and
be a visiting professor somewhere.
Yeah, and have, all these
life.
adoring fans who like what he's doing about global warming and stuff, and not be involved in the, cut and thrust of, what can get you majority support and so on and so forth. I mean, I think that would be annoying. I mean, I think people in our line of work can appreciate the desire to be in a position where you can speak your mind.
Yeah. Global warming, by the way, being yet another one of those issues where the conservatives seem to be out of step with the public at large. I've go to conservative events, and I'm quite commonly told that hear from people there that this is all a big hoax. And I think E.J. Dionne wrote a column about this recently. How sort of just based on the debates, the Democratic and Republican debates, they're just focusing on totally different sets of questions. And the thing that he didn't add in that column, which I think is true, is that the Democrats' questions, let alone their answers, do seem to me to be more in tune with what the public's thinking about. I mean, on the Republican side, there's almost no discussion of health care, for example.
Right.
The Democratic side is really sort of a competition as to sort of who's going to, get the closest to universal coverage, and sort of, that kind of discussion, which is just almost absent, or has been almost absent on the Republican side.
No, I think that's true, and probably worth exploring. But I think I'm about out of time here, so we should probably call it a day.
Okie doke. Good talking to you.
Okay.